everybody. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Jane, for this absolutely wonderful pictorial example of where we were all the way around to where we are now. And I think what we're really trying to do here at WildEast is stitch back those tiny little fragments of nature back together. And of course, it means that farmers have to get back, behind this initiative. But really, the people that are going to do it is the Pledgees. It's everybody that lives in East Anglia. So I've got some chairs here. So if the Pledgees would like to come and join me, I can really just talk about why their stories are so central to what we're trying to achieve. So you've heard about the Map of Dreams. You know what it does from a clever perspective. So thank you, Sarah, for putting it all together. But it's also about these people and about those stories. So my kind of history is as a science community communicator. I started off at the Beeb, went to the New Scientist, did a bit of sailing in between, and then came back and started working for WildEast. And what I think is really important is that we tell positive stories about nature reintroduction. We are surrounded by doom and gloom at every single point, and sometimes it can feel a little bit like we're swimming against the current. So what we actually need to do, in my opinion, is start to tell stories that really inspire other people to do the same kind of thing. So the Map of Dreams, and we'll talk about community connectivity and how you map it and tell it in a very clever scientific story, and Sophie's going to be talking to us about that. But we're also going to be speaking to Daisy here, who moved her young family from London, 2 weeks before lockdown, to a place where it was 20 minutes to her local neighbour and, a 5-mile drive to the local shop. We're going to be speaking to Alex, who has done an extraordinary job with his garden, his semi-detached garden is in North Essex. And then we're also going to be speaking to Paul Hayward, who...
No, that's my brother.
Sorry, I always get it wrong, don't I? But Mark Hayward, sorry Mark, about what he's doing with farming. And it really, I'm a massive fan of all of these people. But in terms of farming, it's really starting to tell that story about how we can farm food and nature. I mean, I'm kind of slightly bored with this kind of rhetoric that, I'm a farmer, so I need to farm food. It's like, well, no, you can farm food and you can farm nature. They don't have to be polarised. So I'm going to start with Alex. Daisy, would you mind if I just pop you here? Yeah. And I'm going to sit down so I don't tower over you, okay. Alex. But so just first of all, can you just tell me a little bit more about what made you decide to pledge to WildEast, what it was that you liked about all of our organisations?
Yeah. I've always been into nature, so it's something that I was into anyway. And I remember seeing the campaign for the first time, and what actually drew me to it was the lynx head on the map of the region. I thought that was fantastic, and I actually did my master's thesis on the feasibility for introducing the Eurasian lynx. So I thought, wow, yeah, that's something that I've always thought that could be achievable in terms of reintroduction. So there was that initially, and then it's just a fantastic campaign that came about right at the right time. I felt this is what we need, just sending all the right messages. And I like the ambitious 20%, rather than sort of he'll do little bits here and there, 1-2%. No, 20%, because that will bring you the real gains that nature needs, and also how sort of collaborative it is, and giving everybody the opportunity to do something positive. Okay.
Yeah. Let me get a little mic. Bear with us, everybody. Just sit. Plug that in again. Well, we have to turn it off for the screen, and I think to get it back on again might be a little bit over certainly my pay grade. So I'm sorry, we're going to be in the dark slightly. Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah. Yay!
So, do you want initially?
Well, yeah. Well, okay. Well, so now we've kind of discussed what made you choose to pledge your 20%, and the fact that you really like our kind of super regional view of kind of trying to get nature across the whole of society, and that it doesn't just happen in agriculture. It doesn't just happen in the countryside. It has to happen in our hearts and minds, wherever you live, wherever you come from, you know, whatever your background. I think what we've got here is a really nice amalgamation of different people's stories, starting from different parts, really. So you moved your wife and your 2 young daughters to your house 8 years ago. Talk me through what it was like when you got there and what it's like now.
Yeah, I think it's 10 years ago now. But we moved from Colchester in a terrace property, just moved into a little village called Missley, 8-9 miles away. So we inherited a decent sized garden, but without being humongous, probably about half an acre. And we inherited a garden that had some wildlife value, but it was there were lots and lots of things that we could do over time to start to improving it for wildlife. So when we moved in, there were quite a few sort of just all sorts of kind of ornamental shrubs and non-native plants and things like that. There wasn't any ponds or there wasn't any hedges. So these were things that we've kind of gradually incorporated into the garden over time, and it is considerably different from 10 years ago.
I mean, your garden really is extraordinary. So I can't say well done enough, and thank you for agreeing to be an exemplar, because I think what's also really important at WildEast as well is that with the map of dreams, when you put your pin in the map of dreams, you'll be able to see who's in your community nearby, if there's a back group or a wildflower group. So that sense of community is really important. But you can also zoom out and you can see what people are doing across the region that you might want to learn from, or you might want to take a few hints and tips from. So your hints and tips, I mean, I always look at things in 3s or 5s, but give me your top 5 things for nature reintroduction in your garden.
Yeah. Okay. Well, definitely. I mean, these will be some things that you've probably heard before, but they are very important things. Incorporate water features would probably be number 1. So it doesn't matter. Somebody mentioned about how big does your garden have to be. I've done positive things in the garden we had before that was about as big as where those 4 people are sitting over there. It was tiny, but you can still do positive things. So even if you had like a tiny little pond. And then I often hear people say to me, "Oh, I've already got a pond," and I just say, "Well, why don't you just dig another one?" Why do we have to live by all these rules? Why is one pond enough? And it's always beneficial for nature, actually having a series of ponds. So if you've got the space, why not? I've got 3 currently. I might dig another one. And as I say, the size of them, it doesn't matter. Even if it's just a tiny pond, just incorporating water features of some description is hugely beneficial. Definitely dead wood, incorporating dead wood into the garden. One of the first things we did when we moved in was there was some trees in the back garden that had been pretty damaged by storms. So we just got a tree surgeon in, but he just lopped off the top and left the trunks of the trees, and they are amazing features in the garden because they're just full of leaf cutter bees and all sorts of scissor bees, all sorts of different insects that bore into the wood, and they just become interesting features in the garden. So don't be it's all this tidiness that is totally detrimental to wildlife. But of course, people see their gardens in different ways. So you can have a tidy sections to your garden, and you can hide away things in corners if you don't like things to look untidy. So definitely dead wood, and look at the boundaries in your garden. If you've currently got fences, is it feasible to either replace the fence with a hedge, or can you at least maybe plant a hedge along your side of that fence, and obviously try to get native species if you can. Loads of different species that you can plant: hawthorn, guelder rose, field maple, all sorts. And they'll create, sort of corridors around your garden and link to the surrounding land, and look at how, what do you currently do with your lawn? Sort of generationally, we've always been taught you've got to cut your lawn. It's got to look a certain way. Why does it have to look that way? You can do all sorts of things with the lawn depending on the size of it. You can have a short mown area, and I'd argue that that's actually quite good if you do that alongside some sections that you mow less regularly, and then you'll get, just allow clovers and wildflowers to grow. I think that's 4.
That's fine. It could be even.
No, there was a 5th and I've forgotten it. It will come to me in a minute.
Well, thank you. So, if you, going back to the map of dreams as well, I mean, what are your thoughts on that kind of, that concept of connectivity? I mean, so often at the moment we have these little pockets of very well run nature reserves, but actually if that they're in an island of nothingness, that they're not really doing very much, that nature will live and die in these very specific areas. So being a part of the WildEast Map of Dreams, being a WildEast Pledgee means that you are actually helping to reconnect. So just tell me a little bit about your thoughts there.
Absolutely. Having the map of dreams helps you visualise what's going on locally. It may surprise you. There may be some people on there who have pledged part of their garden that's nearby. You can sort of link up and create a hedgehog highway or that kind of thing. But one of the absolute key messages and key things in nature recovery is connectedness, and you'll hear it all the time. It's quite a simple concept. And it's incredibly important that if everything's fragmented and isolated, that it's much more difficult for wildlife living there to migrate across. If you're a dormouse that will not touch the ground through fear of being predated, how are you going to get from one section of woodland to another? Maybe plant a hedgerow to connect them. The solutions are there, but that's where the map of dreams will come into play. Hugely, because people can see where all of this work is going on and see where the habitats are, and then we can prioritise and target where are the best places to connect up.
Brilliant, Alex. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. We'll just super excited to have Sophie with us, not just because we've just won some funding with Natural England to work in association with Norfolk and Suffolk County Council to look at something called community connectivity. So we've got this seed corn funding, which means that we'll be able to help write toolkits to help people from across the region to actually start to put into place easy to follow nature recovery movements, really. So it's about mapping what we have with Sarah Teigel. It's about telling people what we actually need in terms of how to increase it. And then we'll be doing some very clever stuff in terms of connectivity about how you snake it through. But really, central to that is community. And Sophie, even before she found out about WildEast, was just doing it anyway. So it's really quite incredible. So Sophie, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Just talk me through your reasons for pledging to WildEast.
So my reasons for pledging to WildEast is when I first read about it, I thought, wow, this is what we need. This is what I've been dreaming about that could happen where I live and where the next door village is and the village after that. And the fact that we can all connect up and allow our wildlife to move from one space to another. So being able to pledge as a WildEast Pledgee and say, yes, this is what I'm doing where I am, and then seeing what other people are doing where they are, means that I'm not just an individual. I am actually part of a massive movement in the place that I love, in the region of East Anglia, and together we're making such a difference for our future, but also our children's future And I just find the fact that WildEast is happening now so fantastic, and it makes me feel so hopeful that together we're making a big difference, and that we can have a future that we'll be proud of, that we can pass on to our children, for us and the wildlife we're sharing our land with.
I mean, so every single time we're approached by media, we've been in National Geographic, we've been in The Guardian, we've been in Countryfile, I always phone up Sophie and say, oh, would you mind, again, talking to these people? But I mean, what you've done before you even found out about WildEast was really extraordinary. So just if you could just blow your own trumpet.
Thank you. So back in 2019, towards the end of the summer, I was sitting in my kitchen and I was looking at the swallows and the house martins sweeping over the mere that happens to be outside my house, thinking, oh my gosh, we live in one of the most nature depleted areas in the world, and what am I doing to make a difference? What can I do, and what can our community do? And so from that thought, it led me on to approaching local government. So that's our parish council, our district council and our county councillor, and saying to them, can we have some spaces on our public land for wildlife? And so I approached them in the September. They said, that's a great idea. Why don't you go away and come back in November, because they meet bi-monthly, with a plan. So I think often, forgive me if anyone's parish councillor here, but often people come and see them and then they think actually they won't come back. Well, in that 2 months, I went around and I spoke to residents, I spoke to businesses, I spoke to farmers that were all in our parish of Risby, and I came back with what was going currently on and what people wanted to achieve. And I also spoke to residents and asked them what they wanted. So I came back in November with a whole proposal, and I presented it to them, obviously with illustrations and what I felt we could do, and they basically went, that's great, off you go and do it. So I was taken aback, but it actually made me believe that if actually you are brave enough to go and speak to them, and then you show that you're persistent, then things can happen. So that was the November. In the February, we gained funding from the district councillor, and we were able to put down spring bulbs. Who doesn't love a spring bulb? And we put that in our wild areas. We've got 11 wild areas within the village, and then we've also got a really big area on our recreation ground around the village hall. So that's fantastic. There are a mosaic of habitats. We've got different things going on. And what that means is, what I did was, and what my other colleagues and friends did within the village, is imagine ourselves as animals. You know, if you're a hedgehog and you want to move from this garden to that garden, and you've got to cross over that road and go to that, how are you going to do it? And as Alex said earlier, without being predated? Well, you need some long grass, don't you? You need those stepping stones, you need those corridors. And so by doing that, we were able to say, well, we want a space there, we want a space there, and we want a space there. So that's what we achieved with that. So that's February. Then fast forward, we were able to go onto Countryfile, and I'd like to thank WildEast for putting the Beeb in touch with us for that. That was just amazing. We went on Countryfile, and we went from just being Wildlife Friendly Village Risby to contacting loads of other communities that got in touch with us, like the lovely ladies from London. Thank you so much. I know. There's been a lot of Zooming. And it's just fantastic to know that there's people in Ludham who are doing the same thing, who want to achieve the same as us. There's people up in Aberdeenshire. We've had people further west than Penzance. I mean, imagine there is a place further than west than Penzance. You know, and together, my community, your community, their communities, imagine if we all linked up. And that's the vision of WildEast, you know. We're all going to link up, and we're all going to make a difference. And it isn't just me pledging my little space, or our village pledging over 1,600 square metres in our recreation ground. It's all villages, communities doing it. And then, like Hugh was saying earlier, you know, farmers, they often feel got at by residents. I do come from a farming background. I do understand how farmers feel. And only 1.7% of our whole population are farmers, and yet they're responsible for 72% of our land, and even more so in East Anglia. So, you know, if we can work together as communities, if we can converse with them, find out what they're doing, and we can tell them what we're doing as residents, then it helps you to become collaborative, and it helps you to become a community together, building something that's going to be great. And we're going to turn this tide of nature depletion in our area to something that is a land sharing space for wildlife and people to benefit. And I just think it's so fantastic that we're here today, and all of you are here today, and all of you people that have pledged, and encouraging other people to pledge, and we can make the big difference for us and our children.
I'm just sitting here thinking, well, what kind of animal would I be? Would I be a shrew? Anyway, to introduce Mark, can I just ask you two to swap over? Would that be all right? So Mark is one of my favourite people.
She doesn't know me. She thinks she knows me.
He took me around his farm in Suffolk. Mark has an amazing pig farm called Dingley Dell, and what he does is that most of the time, 50% of the farm has either wildflower mixes in summer or wild bird mixes in winter, and as he rotates around the farm his pigs, he rotates nature behind it. So he's growing food and nature, and he's also, you know, the pork that he's producing is very, very good. So thank you for joining us. I mean, what made you decide to really approach farming in this way?
Yeah, well, we, as Laura was saying, we've got a business called Dingley Dell Pork. We sell to chefs, premium chefs, food service in the UK and internationally. We're not a huge business, but we're quite an important business in that field. So over the years, we will, on a regular year, we'll have 300 to 400 chefs on farm. We'll have catering students on farm. So we're very well connected with the food world, and we're very privileged to farm. And our farm consists of 3 areas. We've got 50 acres of marshland, where when I was growing up, my dad dug some ponds, and if you dig a pond, it just fills with water. So we've got these fantastic large ponds that are, and the marsh area, which is massively rich in wildlife, but technically it can't really be farmed. So it's a lovely thing to have. It's a great resource, but it's not, and it's a brilliant spot for nature. So that's one environment. Then we've got an arable farm of about 400 acres around our sort of base. And then we've got this pig business, which is probably on about 150 acres, and it's our main business. So we as farmers, we were responsible for 3 areas of land. We grew up with a deep love of nature. My father did a lot of the classic stuff you see, hedges, wildlife corridors around fields, margins. And anyway, we were doing a lot of this sort of stuff for many, many years. And about 8 or 9 years ago, my brother and I, we really got interested in the concept of, this is the area that we farm, this is the area that we're responsible for. We've both got children. How do we improve this area? How do we improve the overall ecosystem of the farm? And it's partly driven by, or hugely driven by, the appreciation of nature and how do we make our farm more rich in wildlife. It's also driven by how do you farm in a way that you're still commercially farming, but you're being inclusive to nature, you're not pushing nature out. How do we measure the outcomes of what we're doing? So there's loads and loads and loads of questions. And then it was also sort of wrapping it up in this whole, or wrapping part of it up eventually, in the whole ethos of us as a business. I will just touch on that bit in a minute. So this is how it also came about. So we messed around with, you'll all be familiar with driving past an outdoor pig unit. And you'll generally see a massive field, it's completely bare and there's pigs. Or a field of wheat, you'll drive past it, it's completely, there's nothing living in that field. It's being sprayed, understandably, it's the farmer's job to produce yield. And you'll see the same thing on a pig unit. So we were interested in how do we get nature in, and So what we've done with our pigs is we've literally taken, instead of putting them on a field for 3 years, which is the classic that you see, we put the same amount of animals, so we're not giving them any more space than anyone else, but we condense them down to 50% of the space and move them more frequently. So what we can do, if you can imagine, I left some brochures at the back about this project, so if I don't cover it coherently, the well thought out brochure does. So what we do is we farm the animals in strips. So we will plant for wildlife. And the main thing being behind our thing was, right, over the farm, if we want to improve the ecosystem, right, richness of planting diversity. 83 football fields is the amount of planting diversity we do, to give you an idea of the scale. Right, we plant plants to encourage pollinators. So if we get more pollinators, we get more birds, we get more small mammals. So very, very simple. We build the ecosystem back up from the bottom. So we started with a huge planting of flowers. So the pigs are on one bit, then there's a bit, no one drives on that bit. There's flowers on that bit, it's providing ground nesting birds, multiple benefits from this. So the flowers we aim to hit, and we've taken the bumblebee as our signature creature. The one thing that we worked off from Jane's presentation was 97% wildflower meadows went since World War II. So if you take the bee, if you read up about the bumblebee, that's the bumblebee's problem. It's a lack of food in East Anglia, and in fact across the whole country. There's some wonderful maps, just shows you bumblebee depletion, which is down to a lack of food. Because modern farming, which accounts for most of the land use, just doesn't grow nectar-rich plants. So there's no space. You drive around the countryside and you don't see flowers. Plenty of bits of woodland, plenty of stuff going on. People's gardens are brilliant for flowers, but actually within the context of farming, there's very little going on. So June, so you've got your native bumblebee, the queen lives over winter, comes out early April time, March, April, absolutely no problem. She's eating stuff out of the hedgerow. She doesn't require a huge amount of nectar. She will then have 300 young bees, roughly, in a hole in the ground. Peak demand for those is normally about the second week of June. So that's the bees' problem. Producing loads of bees in a good year, lack of food, so there'll be less queens going into hibernation the following year. So from our perspective, it was right, we're going to measure the bees, we're going to hit this lot with so much food in June, and we're going to stagger plant the flowers, so hopefully we don't just get flowers for 2 or 3 weeks, we get 2 or 3 weeks, and we get another couple of weeks, and so on. So this is how the project works. And we've been measuring the bees. We get a huge amount of other pollinators as well, as you can imagine, butterflies, everything. And we have seen over time a build-up of other species on the farm. So fairly simple project, works incredibly well. It's a beautiful thing to do. It's a beautiful thing for the guys to be involved with. There is a bit more work involved in it. There is a bit of cost in it. And what it's been hugely beneficial, we've found, is the chefs, the businesses we deal with, they're beginning to understand now where we're coming from when we say to these guys, how you buy your food influences nature, influences the environment. So we're really focused on this idea of trying to get other brands, other farmers, not just to think about having a wildlife-rich farm for themselves, for their neighbours, but also to try and get the food world to think about, well, if we want more nature, we need to support farmers that are doing certain projects, or even encourage the bigger food businesses to do certain projects. So that's kind of the project. We've been measuring it, and I think it was 3 years ago we hit 1 million bumblebees on farm, and that's native bumbles. I mean, it's a phenomenal year for bees, but it was a phenomenal thing to achieve. But there are lots of questions we don't know. We don't know, are those bees then nesting on our farm, the queens? Where do they go? Are we inadvertently, when we replant regularly, are we inadvertently dragging up bumblebee nests? We just don't know that. So the whole thing with the WildEast thing is, this is such a phenomenal platform for a business like mine, because my brother and I, we want to inspire and encourage other farmers and homeowners, with the kind of knowledge we've picked up on farms. So to have a platform where our story can reach not just a food world that will be interested, but actual people that just genuinely want to do something. So this is a tremendous platform, and it will be a tremendous ability for us to share information on our successes and our failures, which are multiple. So that's the project, really.
No, I mean, it really is a story I just thought was absolutely wonderful. She's also a journalist, a much better one than me, by the way. But she came from Hackney 2 weeks before lockdown with her young children and husband. You know, when she was in Hackney, she could look across her street and essentially see what was going on in her friends' front rooms. You went to this beautiful spot on the banks of the River Deben, or Deben, sorry. Just talk me through kind of what it was like to move back to Suffolk and why you've got involved in the WildEast journey.
Thanks, Laura. Hello. So yeah, it was quite a shock. We hadn't really planned to do that, but we were living in Hackney and we were quite sort of stuck in the city, and we thought we would be there for the foreseeable future. And I was working at the Times as a journalist, and my husband had a business there. My eldest daughter, I've got 3 children, she was at school. But then we came across this place in Suffolk. I grew up here and sort of fell in love with it, and decided we just felt compelled to sort of throw everything in the kitchen sink at it and upend our lives. And so that's what we did, and we moved there 2 weeks before lockdown. So it was sort of good timing on that front because we had lots of space. But we were also in London. I was very disconnected from the natural world. I didn't really know anything about it. Just that's sort of what happens when you're living, you know, in a place where nature is only kind of as a decoration. You don't really notice the seasons, anything like that. So when we arrived there, I sort of realised I really needed to start learning about it. And so I started doing a lot of reading, all about reading books like Isabella Tree's book and George Ewart Evans' book about farming and getting really involved in it. And I just sort of fell in love with the whole rural life and all the intricacies of land management. And we loved it. It was you know, it was like a really exciting adventure in the place where I'd actually grown up, but it felt brilliant.
Yeah. So, as part of your kind of journey, as part of WildEast, I mean, what do you think is so special about, you know, doing things like putting your pledge on the map of dreams and seeing the community around you, and then if you zoom out, how that fits together as part of this super regional network of people for nature? I mean, how's that process been for you?
Well, I think it's sort of vitally important, really, because I mean, East Anglia, there's so much industrialised farming, and nature's really been pushed right to the margins. And so nature needs a bigger voice, and this is giving it a bigger voice. And there's no point in us doing it individually. We all need to sort of spread the message and make a kind of positive wave movement of thoughts about it and feeling for nature. And that's exactly what you're doing. So I feel like it was just, I think it came at a really good time, and I feel like it's sort of capturing the zeitgeist in the movement. And, you know, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the World Wildlife Fund released a report saying that we've lost 70% of wildlife since the 1970s, and it's never been needed more than it's needed now. And the solution is so simple. We need to give more space to nature, and so it's fantastic that WildEast is sort of capturing it for our region.
No, I mean, you know, you obviously fantastic journalist, as I say, but you know, we're both really keen supporters of positive messaging to inspire people to do more, to not feel frightened about the fact that they might not know enough, and that there's loads of other people who really have started from the baseline, which I love nature. I come from the countryside, but you know, I've learned all this in 2 years, and so I always think if I'm talking to somebody, you know, just doesn't really matter where they come from. We're all at some kind of starting point. So let's talk about where you moved to. I mean, it does sound absolutely beautiful. What was it like when you got there? What kinds of things have you been doing to kind of make more space for nature where you are?
Yeah, so it's a little cottage on the Deben, but it came with 45 acres of land, which was amazing, but I also had no idea what it meant or what I was supposed to do with it. So I started learning about that, and at the time it had a lot of ponies on it and a lot of fences, and I think probably quite a lot of spraying. And there's also woodland and salt marsh and meadows, things like that. So lots of very good environment for nature, but not really, no one's been thinking about it in that way, I don't think. So what the sort of, first of all, everyone was saying to us, there's a lot of nettles and thistles, you need to spray it. And that's when I got in touch with WildEast, because everyone was telling me, please spray it, because there's too many nettles and thistles and ragwort. And so I asked the WildEast guys, and they said, don't spray it. And then we realised that it would be good to rip out all the fences inside, so it was cut into a lot of different spaces, and to fence around the perimeter. And Suffolk Wildlife Trust came and they advised us, and they said it'd be really great if you could get some cows, a small number of cows, to do conservation grazing. So I met through WildEast, I think, this man who's got belted galloways and needs places to graze them. So we've got a small number of belted galloways now that graze all through the wood and everywhere, and they're sort of doing amazing things, I think, for the habitat there, and they will over time bring back the wildflowers and things that used to be there, because it was designated a county wildlife site in the 90s, and I think there was amazing wildflowers, but they've gone, I think, probably with the overgrazing and the spraying and that kind of thing. So the hope is that they'll bring that back. And then we planted a lot of hedges around the perimeter with the help of the Woodland Trust. And we've done, the wood is very thickly planted, sort of had a pheasant pen in it, and it was just very thick, and there's not much biodiversity in there. So we've done coppicing and a lot of felling to try and bring in more light. And we planted quite a lot of black poplar trees as well, because they're Britain's rarest native tree, and we need more of them. So we've planted a bunch of those. And we're going to, next year, there's a stream, and we're going to sort of fill it up with woody bits, like a beaver would if we had a beaver, to make pools and create some scrapes in the meadow, so that there's a lot of wading birds there on the river, and the chicks need like soft edges so they can feed in spring. So yeah.
I mean, for someone who doesn't know very much about nature, she's putting us all to shame, really. You know, I think what we all learned really as part of lockdown too is the fact that nature is a part of us, that we need to be outside, that it makes us feel good. It's really good for our mental health, and that should be accessible to anybody and everybody, no matter where you come from. And that's why WildEast is so important to me, that it's this democratisation of nature recovery, that wherever you are, wherever you come from, even if you don't have your own land, there's communal space that we're trying to make space for nature. And in terms of kind of mental health and bringing your children up in that kind of environment, how has that been for you?
I think, like, we all realised in lockdown, didn't we, it's completely transformative for our mental health, and I definitely found that. Looking after my children at home, just getting a chance to go outside and be in the wood without them, it's amazing. But in terms of the children, I feel like, first of all, it's very hard to get them out of the house, always. I think that's the case anywhere. But as soon as they're outside, they're then sort of playing in a way that is so natural for children. And I think as adults, we can sometimes forget how to be in nature. When you see a child doing it with sticks, collecting, and all that stuff, it comes very naturally to them. And I feel like it's so important that children have the chance to connect with nature like that, so that when they're older, they can remember it, and it's be a sort of comfort to them throughout their lives. And also, that's when you start to care about it. And my experience coming from London, not really thinking or caring about nature, and then suddenly being in it and remembering, and then sort of really feeling all those things about the climate and what we were doing to it, and really drove me to think, I need to rewild our land, I need to do something about this. So the more people that care about it and are connected to it, the more that we can all get together and do something about it.
Thank you, Daisy. And so really, I suppose in summary, really, it's just about making sure that we all feel part of this journey. We are part of a community. The natural world runs through me in the same way that it runs through you all. And without you guys as pledgees, without people like these four panellists here, it couldn't be done. So I suppose it's just for me to say thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming today. If there's any questions, we'll get to those in a second. But if we could just do a quick round of applause for our speakers. Anybody got any questions? Hugh?
Sorry to jump in early. I mean, it's more of a statement actually, but and referencing Mark, because I think it's really important for the room of consumers, is we've done quite a lot of work here at some ways and around kind of two words that don't really, I think for me anyway, a couple of years ago, don't really fit together.
That's my real interest in this project, because yes, me and my brother, we're very lucky. We want to have tons of wildlife and all the rest. But if it's just people like us doing it, it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm very interested in the techniques where someone can commercially run their business, but at the same time can do huge amounts for nature. That's the bit that's really interesting, because that's the bit that leapfrogs, you know, the process.
We were having a quick chat last night about what we're going to talk about today. And you were talking.
You're telling me.
Make sure you mention the WildEast.
That's funny.
But you were talking about what was it? Barn eggs, weren't you? And you were saying that years ago in commercial kind of egg production.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I export to 20 different countries, and none of it big volume, but we work with some, really serious food businesses. So we get to deal with all these different hard-nosed Chinese business people, all sorts of people, all different nationalities, and the chefs we deal with. Every time I sit one of them down and I say to them, this is what we're doing on our farm. We're starting with flowers, so we get more pollinators, so we get more birds, more mammals. Every single one of them gets it. Within 5 minutes, you've managed to articulate and particularly use some nice photos and stuff. And I haven't had a single person anywhere in the world, whether they're from an urban background, whether they're in a country that doesn't give a toss about stuff, I haven't had any of them do anything but engage. And it's my firm belief from all of the experiences I've had is that within the next 10 to 20 years, we will be going into supermarkets and we will be able to identify what products did what good for nature. And it will be quite specific, I think. So you might have a brand, let's take wouldn't it be great, say like Hovis. Hovis is, I don't know anything about their business, but wouldn't it be marvellous if they turned around and they said to all of the people that supply them with wheat, and this might not be simple, supply chain wise, but let's say they turned around and they said, we all want you to plant 2% of your land, very nominal figure, with these wildflowers to support this bird or this moth or an overall scheme. That way Hovis can then, on their bread, they can say, through you purchasing this at a very nominal extra amount of money, we are doing this phenomenal project and we are supporting one animal or a multitude of animals. They can make it their own scheme. And you've got this self-fulfilling, market-driven policy. Don't get me wrong, this is not to get away, because at the same time, I think this whole idea of getting communities involved with farmers, with gardeners, all of this is really, really important. But from my experience in the farming world, this is where we need to get this to. And can I just make one more point? I find it very interesting that with the whole kind of like this whole idea of Brexit and a different world for farmers to work in, I think, why don't we, the UK farmers, why don't we claim this environmental space? Why aren't we collectively claiming this for ourselves? Because we've got a great landscape, we've got great farms, we haven't really got to go too much further to do stuff to claim globally, because no one else is doing it. If you look around the world, there's no nation that's claiming this space. And I think UK agriculture could do that with enough vision. And if they did that, that helps secure the farmers' markets a bit better globally, helps ensure that the smaller farmers can survive. So kind of, I'm a long way down this track because I've been doing it so long, but that's the aspect that really turns me on, is how do you do it commercially? How do you do it successfully? I mean, I don't know. We're probably growing far too much stuff. I suspect we're overdoing, but time will tell on that one.
Any more questions? Hi.
Just on what you were saying, how do you think you can get other farmers?
I think through projects like this. I think when people start, most amazing thing I've seen in a long time, because this shows how it's happened over multiple years, and you can see how it happens. And that's why you've got to kind of like, the day farmers, don't get me wrong, there will always be people like you, there will always be people like me, there will be plenty of people who want to do it because it's a family farm or a multitude of reasons. But you've got to get to the guys that are doing it hard commercially. The big companies that maybe they don't own the land, they rent the land, so they've got no affinity. It's not like their land. So you've got to get to those farming businesses and you've got to create commercial advantageous scenario for them to want to do it, or at least a cost neutral point. You know, there is a great argument going on at the moment, or great debate. If you have more pollinators on your farm, does it increase your yield? Which it may or may not do. I have no idea. I know the government have been looking at this. But really, all you really want to do is be in a position where you can say to a business, look, hey, do that. It might cost you a tiny bit more, because you're not talking about a lot of money here, like Hugh was saying. You take out your awkward corners of the field, you utilise land that, like with us with our pigs, all we're doing is planting some flowers. When they've died off, some of them we leave for birds to overwinter, some of them we put the pigs back on. Every single year I have to research what we've planted and whether it will kill a pig. And I always end up in this scenario, we'll just move 2 or 3 and see what happens. We haven't killed one yet. But, you know, all we're really doing is some extra work and some planting, which if you spread it over what we produce, it's not like an animal welfare scenario where someone's got to take an animal from a hard intensive system, put it in a much kinder system, but at great expense. This is not it's not a huge problem.
But your pigs did look pretty happy when I came to see them. Even on one of the hottest days, they all look pretty happy. So
It
yeah.
looks beautiful. It's a great
Yeah.
face.
Yeah.
If anyone, you won't see my pigs because they're sort of tucked off the road, but if anybody drives around Campsie Ash, which is where our arable farm is, it's not far from Woodbridge, but you will just see fields or massive chunks of Facilia. It looks beautiful. And, you know, all the people in the village, because we don't care where people walk, you see them walking and they're taking photographs and they're just enjoying nature. You know, they're getting a buzz out of enjoying it.
I've never seen so many birds on one small piece of land as when I came to yours. It was extraordinary. Anybody else got any other questions? Or are you? Yep. Sorry.
Laura, can